Burgeonites, welcome back to MTG Burgeoning. It's Friday, so that can only mean one thing. Kitchen Table Series Friday. This is our 9th installment of this series, and if you've been watching all along, you most likely can predict the colors of this next deck, as we began the series with mono white, and then went to blue, black, red, green, and then went on to the allied color pairs of white, blue, blue, black, and black, red. That leads us to green, red, a Gruul deck. And what are we going to do with this Gruul deck? Well, with this Gruul deck, we are going to Warp World. For 5 and triple red, this sorcery from the original Ravnica says, each player shuffles all permanents he or she owns into his or her library, then reveals that many cards from the top of their library. Each player puts all artifact, creature, and land cards revealed this way into play, then puts all enchantment cards revealed this way into play, and then puts the rest on the bottom of their library in any order. So the purpose of this deck is we want to ramp out to cast Warp World as quickly as possible, and hopefully from the permanents that we get into play, help us to create an insurmountable advantage against our opponents, where we can either do direct damage to win, attack to win, or sacrifice creatures to deal damage to win. So let's begin with a play set of Warp World. 4 Warp Worlds. That's how we start off this deck tech. Let's move right to the mana base. Okay, so we're going to start off with 7 mountains. 7 basic mountains. And then we are going to start with 8 basic forests. 7 mountains and 8 basic forests. 1 play set of the Gruul Checkland Rootbound Crag. This enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a mountain or a forest, and it taps for a red or a green. 1 play set, 4 copies. And rounding out our mana base, 2 copies of Cinderglade. It's a mountain forest, taps for a red or a green, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. Now, before we transition to our spells, I will throw in the disclaimer that if anyone is looking to try to build this particular deck, as I am going to eventually do as through an upgrade, is I would want to replace the checklands with a set of Stomping Grounds and 2 more Cinderglades, because I would want to have as many mountains in our land type as possible, and you'll see the reason for that through the Department of Foreshadowing. Okay, so that's our mana base. Let's look into our ramp spells. And of course, if we're playing Kitchen Table, we're throwing in a Soul Ring. You know about this. 1 gives us 2. Soul Ring-a-ding-dong. 1 playset of Utopia Sprawl. This is an enchantment aura from Dissension, and it is for 1 green, and it comes into play. We choose a color. We're most likely going to be choosing red, because that triple red in Warp World could at times be a little bit of a barrier or obstacle to cast. So we want to smooth the mana as much as possible. And when Enchanted Forest, make sure it has to be a forest. When Enchanted Forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of the chosen color to his or her mana pool. Okay, so again, if we're able to put as many lands with forest in them, in the land type as possible, like a Stomping Ground, like Cinderglade, then the Utopia Sprawl can also go onto those lands and not just your basic forest. 1 playset of Utopia Sprawl. Next ramp, 1 playset of Fertile Ground. This enchantment aura from Lorwyn. Whenever an enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any color to their mana pool. So this is similar characteristics to the Utopia Sprawl, except we don't have to name the color when it comes into play. 1 play set. So we have 8 land auras. Staying on theme with ramp, let's look at a few of our rinky-dink creatures. We have 3 copies, just 3, of the Farhaven Elf. When it enters the battlefield, we may search our library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped. If we do, shuffle our library. Shadowmoor, 3 copies. And rounding out, we have 3 copies of Elvish Visionary. 1 in a green, enters the battlefield, draw a card. Alright, so you've seen the spell we're working around, the mana base, and the ramp. Let's talk about how we win off of casting a Warp World. Let's begin with a very, very nice legendary praetor known as Urabrask the Hidden. For 3 and 2 red, this legendary praetor gives creatures we control haste, and equally important, creatures our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So if we hit the Warp World with an Urabrask, all of our creatures have haste, all of our opponents' creatures come into play tapped. This allows our potentially massive army to swing in unimpeded and unblocked. 3 copies of Urabrask the Hidden. How are we going to create this massive army? Well, let's take a look at one of our landfall creatures that's going to help us do that. The Rampaging Baloths. For 4 and 2 green, we get a 6/6 trampler that whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we put a 4/4 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. 3 copies, Rampaging Baloths. And at this time, it's important to point out that Warp World says, you can see it right here, each player puts all artifact, creature, and land cards revealed this way into play. So the lands and the creatures for us are going into play at the same time. They're going to see each other at the same time. Rampaging Baloth will have the landfall triggers. So it's going to get those 4/4 beast creature tokens if we're fortunate enough to hit one off of a Warp World. Next up for our direct damage, we have the Akum Hellkite. For 4 and 2 red, it's a 4/4 flying dragon, and it has the landfall mechanic. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, this Hellkite deals 1 damage to any target, or to target creature or player. If the land is a mountain, Akum Hellkite deals 2 damage to that creature or player instead. I'm going to assume that this is from Battle for Zendikar, so I'm guessing that the errata is probably changed to any target. Again, as we foreshadowed earlier, having the mountain types for Cinderglade and for Stomping Ground, as many mountains as possible coming in triggering this, helps to do additional direct damage. Akum Hellkite, 4 copies. Okay, and we have Avenger of Zendikar. For 5 and 2 green, Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield. Put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land we control. And then landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature we control. Again, since the lands and the creatures come into play at the same time, they all see each other. So Avenger of Zendikar is going to create those tokens as long as we arrange the stacks on the triggers on the stack accordingly. He's going to create his plant tokens, and then the lands are going to give each one of them +1/+1 counters, each land that comes into play. And hopefully we have an Urabrask in play to give them haste. 4 copies of Avenger of Zendikar. And our last creature, Chancellor of the Forge. For 4 and triple red, we have a 5/5 giant, and if we have this card in our opening hand, we can reveal it, and during the first upkeep, we can put a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield. When Chancellor of the Forge enters the battlefield, we can put X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures we control. 3 copies of this. The synergies, aside from the Hellkite. The Hellkite's inclusion is because of its ability to deal direct damage with our lands coming into play. The synergy among Urabrask, the Rampaging Baloths, Avenger of Zendikar, and Chancellor of the Forge is what makes this a winning combination. If we hit them off of a Warp World, they all have haste. The creature tokens created by the Baloth, by the Avenger of Zendikar, and by the Chancellor of the Forge will all have haste. Our opponent's creatures will come into play tapped, and we should have enough to destroy them, particularly on how many creatures we have when Chancellor of the Forge's ability comes off of the stack. Because if he comes into play, we're putting his ability on the stack first, so it is the last to resolve. So that way, any creatures that the Avenger of Zendikar creates, or any creatures that the Rampaging Baloths create, they're already in play when Chancellor of the Forge resolves off the stack. So if the stars align, that's a combination of creatures coming into play that should win us the game. A few more cards to help push through the last points of damage. We got a Goblin Bombardment ×2. Just for the purposes of redundancy, this awesome enchantment from Tempest, sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. We should have lots of expendable token creatures to sacrifice. Goblin Bombardment helps us to finish the game. Last card. This is a finisher, and that's Purphoros. This mythic rare from Theros is 3 in a red. He's indestructible as a 6/5. And as long as our devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. However, he will trigger into play as a creature from the Warp World. And then once he hits the battlefield, he looks to see if he has devotion, and if he's not at 5, then he's not a creature, but he enters in as a creature with Warp World. And once he's in play, whenever another creature enters a battlefield under our control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. So with Purphoros already in play, and any combination of the Rampaging Baloth, the Avenger of Zendikar, Chancellor of the Forge, them all coming into play at the same time off of a Warp World, triggering Purphoros, winning the game, and anything that isn't enough to outright kill our opponents, we can sack to the Goblin Bombardment, or we can attack with Urabrask because all of our opponent's creatures will be untapped. Folks, I kid you not, this Gruul Warp World deck is an absolute blast to play. I recommend putting it together. I understand a couple of the pieces are a little pricey. You can just try in the future to accumulate the pieces necessary. It is a blast to play. With that in mind, let's do some play testing so I can demonstrate this deck's efficiency. Alright, so you saw the deck tech of this Gruul Warp World deck. Now let's test play it, or play test it, and let's see how we can do in trying to accomplish a Warp World as quickly as we possibly can through the use of our enchant land spells and our land fetching dorks. Alright, so here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's see. This is our kitchen table series. This is what is this? Our ninth kitchen table deck series. Wow, we're really flying through here. Okay, come on, give us. Oh no! Sorting is good. Green, green, green. Oh, I don't want to keep this hand at all. So let us do a quick mulligan. Yeah, let's shuffle this up off camera. Alright, we gotta have a better draw than that last one. Holy mackerel. Oh. Do a quick one of these. Alright, here we go. How quick can we get one of these babies cast? Let's go down to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Forest, where were you last? Draw. Okay, Perforos. Rather see you stay in the library. Ooh, that's going to give us a free token. Alright, so let us put back, we'll shuffle Perforos back into our hand. I'm sorry, we'll shuffle Perforos back into our library. And then we will show the Chancellor of the Spires and get a nice 1/1 hasty goblin token, which can cause some early turn havoc as much as a 1/1 red goblin can. So let's grab ourselves a goblin and put that guy into play. Alright, let's see. Here we go. Turn counter is there. Turn 1. We drew the Warp World. We needed that. Okay. Forest. Turn 2, draw. Put down a Rootbound Crag. We'll tap both of those. Fertile Ground. Okay, got a little bit of ramp. That was turn 2. So let's untap. Turn 3, Elvish Visionary, very nice. So let's tap 2, cast a Visionary, draw a card. All right, rather see that guy stay in our library. Play a land, we'll tap 2, we'll play another Elvish Visionary, giving us, we don't want these in our hand. All right, untap. It's not looking overly great. Come on, Fetcher. Land. So that's 5 mana. We can cast nothing so far. Let's move to turn 4. Draw a card. Another Warp World. We're going to be stuck here. Turn 5. Draw a card. Let's see how this will play out. Let's tap our 3. Let's play the Firehaven Elf. Grabbing ourselves a mountain that we'll put into play tapped. Giving us 6 total mana next turn. So if we can draw a land, we can cast our Warp World. It's only going to be for 5. That's not going to be great. But let's go with it and see how we do. Okay. Untap. Minimally, we can play one of our landfall creatures. Turn 6. We draw a Goblin Bombardment. So let's put that into play. At least it gives us another permanent. Untap. Not looking too favorable here. Turn 7. Give us the land. No land. We're going to say that this one was a definite bust. Let's try it again. Alright, so that first round, that was not going to be good for us. It seemed unlikely that we were going to be victorious in that game. Took us too long to get started, and we had a bad opening hand, shortening our hand by a card. Didn't get the appropriate ramp, had the wrong cards in our hand. Well, if that's the worst, then it can only get better. Let's see it get better. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mountain. That guy. Goblin Bombardment. Alright, we get another Goblin token. Oh, give us another land at least. Alright, we just can't keep that. If we would have kept it, we would have drawn. Nope. Alright. Mulligan. Oh, come on. These guys in here. Let's go. Come on. Jeez. I'm wondering if maybe take out the dragon for some additional ramp, but I've got a bunch of ramp in here, just not drawing it. We got the land fetching elves. We got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Forest, mountain, there we go. Now we'll be mana flooded. Oh, jeez. You know what? We're going to keep all of this. We'll shuffle back a forest. We'll keep that as our opening hand. I'm okay with that. Turn 1, Utopia Sprawl. Turn 2, we're drawing a card off of the Elvish Visionary. I think we can make that work. At least we're not going to miss our land drops. Okay, here we go. Alright, ready, folks? Here we go. Turn 1. Draw a card. That's beautiful. That's what we like to see. And we'll put a Utopia Sprawl. And of course, we'll call red. That was turn 1. Here's turn 2. Oh, that's great too. Let's play a Rootbound Crag. Let's not even mess around. We'll just tap 3. We'll put a Farhaven Elf into play. We'll search our library for... We'll throw a mountain in there. Mountain into play. Okay, this one's looking better. We can just get a couple more rampies. We are going to be looking pretty good. Shuffle, shuffle, cut. Alright, we untap. Here's turn 3. We're going to drop a land. We're going to have 5 mana available. Alright, we'll put into play. Let's put a mountain into play. Let's tap this for 2. We can throw our Elvish Visionary into play, drawing a card, getting an Urabrask. That's very good. We'll tap 3. We'll throw another elf into play. This time we'll put a forest into play. Tapped. And with a land in our hand, if we can just draw the Warp World, we might make a good play here. Let's see. Alright, so we're untapping. It's turn 4. Let's get that Warp World. Here it is. Oh, Cinderglade. Put it in the play. Yes, we'll throw Urabrask out there. Now we're just playing the waiting game. Turn 5. There it is. Alright, folks. Turn 5. We did it. Okay. So we're going to 2-4. So we're going to tap for, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8. 4, 6, 8. Alright, so we got our Warp World for 8. We're going to count out our permanents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 4 is 12. So we are going to be looking, well, we're going to shuffle our permanents into our library. And then we're going to grab 12, put them into play. And let's see what happens. This is what we've been waiting for. Turn 5 is reasonable. This is our big shot, our 12 permanent. Let's see if all the hoopla, if it translates to the big screen. I can tell you it has many times for me in many games. Turn 5, Warp World. Let's make sure we do this legitimately. All right, here we go, folks. Cut. We got 12 permanents. 12 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay. Here we go. Let's reveal these cards. We have an enchantment comes in at the end. There's a creature. That's our Hellkite. There's our Chancellor of the Forge. An elf. A Warp World, which will get us nothing. That's what we were looking for. Farhaven Elf. Perforos is a creature. That goes into play as well. And this should be very favorable for us, folks. We got our 2 enchantments here. We put down our 4 lands. Last to come into play are our enchantments. Utopia Sprawl right there. Alright, so let's move to all of the triggers that we have. Let's see. So we are going to stack our triggers in such a way that the Farhaven Elf land comes into play at last. So we will put his onto the stack first. So it comes off last. Then we'll put on the Hellkite, the Visionary, and then Chancellor of the Forge. Let's see, this goes to the bottom. So what will end up happening, and then we also have our Perforos trigger, so this is looking to be very, very good. Let's move right through. We get our 4 Goblin tokens. Let's pull our lands back. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 Goblin tokens because of the Chancellor of the Spire. And we also have Perforos as a creature because of Devotion. So Perforos is also going to have his abilities put onto the stack. He's going to be dealing 16 damage to each opponent. We're going to draw our card. We draw another elf, which is awesome. Because what we can do is fetch out a mountain. Because with the landfall ability, we're going to deal 2 damage to any target. So that's one creature, that's one opponent, and another opponent. So with the 16 damage that Perforos did, on top of the 3 shocks that we can throw around with the Akum Hellkite, not to mention that the Farhaven Elf is going to fetch us out another mountain, putting it into play tapped, making another 2 points of damage there. And then we have the Goblin Bombardment here to sack any of our creatures to finish off the table. That was the perfect way to Warp World. And we didn't even get an Avenger of Zendikar, and we didn't even get the Rampaging Baloths. And we're just going to stop right there, folks. That was a good Warp World. You go forth, you enjoy that day. Want to become a Pack Wars combatant? 4 easy steps. Step number 1. Click on the link below in the description, or go to www.buymeacoffee.com/MTG Burgeoning. Step number 2. Select either membership or support. Membership will enroll you into Pack Wars for $5 each month. Support will cost $5 for 1 month. Step number 3, complete payment information. The name you use will appear on the site. Use your real name, use your YouTube handle, or use no name at all and be anonymous. Be sure to include your email address in the information. Step number 4, most importantly, prepare for war.